hatred. You say the word tick to a person, and it might evoke, memories from their childhood and their experiences with getting bitten by one of these beasts. But this carries well into adulthood. Um, and so one of the good things about this is that we're all on the same page in corporate speak. We're aligned. We're all behind the fact that we've got a big problem and we've got to fix it. All right. Lyme is not a new disease. Lyme is a re-emerging disease. Okay, this is not something that popped up in Lyme, Connecticut 40 plus years ago and started spreading out. Uh, Lyme is endemic in over 60 countries around the world. It's endemic throughout North America, but also in parts of South America. Sure, Western Europe. It's a big up and coming problem, and certainly in Southeast Asia. So it's kind of a universal problem. All right, if you've ever felt like you're living at ground zero, it's because you are, okay? If we look at the United States, all 6 New England states occupy the top 6 positions in the country for Lyme disease. So we are living at ground zero. That is an absolute fact. All right, let's look at different players that we deal with. I kind of am looking at you guys, and I detect there are a few baby boomers in this audience, okay, including myself. And for us baby boomers, when we were kids, tick identification was easy. This was the only tick that we had, the good old American dog tick. Um, if we had deer ticks and Lyme disease when I was a kid, I'm actually from Worcester, and the way I spent my youth out in the woods, around the swamps and in meadows, I would have contracted Lyme disease about 50 times, and we'd be having this discussion through a Ouija board. Okay, I consider the dog tick more of an annoyance than a public health threat. It can vector the pathogens that cause Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tularemia, but this far north and in Massachusetts specifically, those 2 diseases are quite rare. Lone Star tick, this is the new tick in town, okay? It doesn't get named Lone Star because it comes from Texas. It gets it because those adult females have that bright white spot on their back. So that is just crystal clear identification characteristic. This thing has been moving north steadily for decades. A number of ecologists, myself included, think this is a sign of climate change. That fake news stuff that you hear all the time. The earth is getting warmer. We're seeing plants and animals in places we never used to see them before. And up until recently, the northernmost established populations we knew of were on the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Well, 10 years ago, I was asked to come out to Sandy Neck Beach Park, okay, in West Barnstable, and they were seeing a tick they didn't recognize, and that's a 6 mile long peninsula. And I went and did some sampling in there, and I found Lone Star ticks from one end of the place to the other. They own that piece of real estate. And then a few years later, I was called out to Falmouth along the Shining Sea Bike Trail. We found another well-established population. So what has happened 10, maybe probably even 12 years ago, um, this was introduced to Sandy Neck Beach Park by migratory birds. That's a perfect flyway. So you can easily think about birds stopping off on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard, picking up some Lone Star ticks, stopping off in Sandy Neck, they drop off, lay some eggs, and boom, off we go. But that bike trail, that is not a flyway for migratory birds. So what I'm pretty confident has happened is that once it got established in Sandy Neck, there are animals on the ground that are moving this thing around. Okay, ticks are wonderful hitchhikers. So on that bike trail, I put out some trail cameras to kind of see what kind of animal activity we had in the area. And very quickly, and this grassy strip on the bike trail, that's where we found the population of Lone Star ticks. And I would see this big flock of turkeys moving north, and a few days later, they'd be coming south. And when they were first describing the Lone Star tick, they almost named it the turkey tick because that is a preferred host. But there's other creatures in the area, well, a lot of rabbits. And I ran into a hunter that takes out bunnies, and he told me that when he gets a rabbit, the ears are just loaded with Lone Star ticks. Yeah, wild cannons, a lot of coyotes in the area. A very good host for moving these things around, and a very dapper Bigfoot out for a morning stroll. And this is one of the reasons I became a scientist. You go out looking to get data, and you don't know what the heck you're going to find. All right, this thing is different than the ticks we're accustomed to dealing with. It's an aggressive biter. And what I mean by this is that they have really good vision and they can run. They can run with the speed of a spider. If they see you from, say, 20 feet away, they're going to come rolling at you like a little race car. Now, the Lone Star tick females, she lays her eggs in a mass like other ticks, and you might have 4 or 5 thousand eggs in that mass, and they hatch out in, say, early August into September, and they hatch into these tiny larvae that are less than a millimeter long. So when they hatch out, you end up with these very high concentrations of these larval ticks. So if you're strolling along and you bump into one, generally you're going to meet most of the family in a hurry. And with this aggressive behavior, you can get 200-300 bites before you know it. And those things will burn and itch for a good 4 to 6 weeks, even with being treated with something like cortisone. Now, the larvae don't transmit any disease, but that is something that people have relayed to me that they've dealt with, they've experienced this, and they're not happy at all. Um, Now, they don't transmit the bugs that cause Lyme disease, but they've got their own unique pathogens associated with it. So ehrlichiosis and tularemia, yeah, those two things can be quite serious, but we haven't seen them occurring on the Cape as yet. We haven't seen them in the tick samples that we've analyzed. Stari, that's a type of rash disease with flu-like symptoms, pretty easy to treat and cure with antibiotics. And I know we have found Stari in the tick population, and Cape Cod Hospital has diagnosed and treated people for Stari. But the real game changer with this tick is the bite of a Lone Star tick can trigger an allergy to red meat consumption. And this allergic response can range as mild as hives, but all the way to anaphylactic shock. You can't breathe, you're in a hospital. And it's not just beef, but it's pork and lamb, and even beef byproducts like beef derived gelatin. And if you think about processed foods that we eat, including those marshmallows we roast for our kids on 4th of July, um, so there are triggers in a lot of the foods we consume. And what I've recently learned is that this allergic response isn't just meat and gelatin, but even in high fat dairy products like ice cream. Um, who could live without having ice cream, all right, as part of your diet? So it's something that needs a lot more research to understand what's going on. But this has occurred on Cape Cod. All right. The principal player still is really, we all call it the deer tick, but the more accurate name for this tick is the black-legged tick, and we'll talk about the reasons for that in a minute. Now, these are very unlike Lone Star. Deer ticks don't chase you. In fact, deer ticks are blind, so they're an ambush predator. They have to wait for dinner to come to them. So they have this behavior called questing. And so you see this adult female deer tick, and she's got her front legs stretched up in the air like she's signaling a New England Patriots touchdown. Okay. She's not. Her nose is on her front legs. And ticks have a really acute sense of smell. And one of the chemicals they smell is carbon dioxide, what we exhale. So if you're walking through an area and you're breathing regularly, you're changing the concentration of carbon dioxide around you, and they can detect that. They have sensory organelles that can detect changes in temperature, like body heat. So the closer you get to it, it knows something's going on, and they can detect vibration. So they react to all that incoming information, and they will orient those legs and wave them out and hope that you get close enough to touch them, because at the end of those legs is this beautiful little claw. And all you have to do is touch it. It's going to attach and start climbing and looking for a place to have dinner. All right. So let's look at the tick hardware. How do they accomplish this stuff? Here's a tick head under a microscope. And those things on either side of the tick's head, those are what we call palps. That's what the tick uses to actually taste you and see if you taste interesting enough to become dinner. Because we do know that ticks will be selective about what they are going to feed on. If you are so chosen, it takes these things here. These are called chelicerae, and they're like little scalpel blades with hooks. And what the tick does, it makes an incision, hooks in, and pulls. And it does this over and over. It's kind of like doing the breaststroke in swimming. And with each tug, it drives that beak of the mouth part down deeper and deeper into your skin. And if we look at that under the scope, yeah, that's pretty formidable hardware. It's fairly long, but it's also got those nice recurved barbs like little fish hooks. So if you were ever trying to remove a tick from you and felt like you were ripping out flesh, literally, it's because you are. And these guys, they're designed to stay for a while. Ticks aren't like mosquitoes that might feed for a couple seconds. They're in and out. A tick from start to finish might be feeding on you for 5 days. And the way this process works is a tick doesn't start sucking blood as soon as it attaches. The first thing a tick does, it injects you with tick spit. And for a science geek like me, tick spit is fascinating. It's got all kinds of really interesting chemicals. And one of the chemicals in tick spit is glue. Those things actually have the barbs, but they cement themselves in place. The tick spit contains anticoagulants that'll keep your blood from clotting, vasodilators that'll increase the flow of blood to the point of attachment, and it will anesthetize your nerves because that thing wants to be undetected while it does its business. So it goes through cycles of sucking blood and spitting, sucking blood and spitting. And when it's done, it'll secrete an enzyme, dissolve that glue, back itself out, and may have left you with a few microbial presents. All right. Why the name deer tick is a misnomer. This thing has been associated or documented to be associated with 125 different vertebrate species. So it's not just about deer, it's not just about mice. This is a real complex ecosystem. There's a lot of moving parts here. Rodents are really key here. They are what we call competent hosts. And what we mean by host competency with things like mice and chipmunks and rats, they have the ability to harbor that Lyme disease bacteria and transmit it back into the tick population. So it's kind of like microbial ping pong. Birds play a role, two different ways. We already saw that birds can move ticks around. They're great dispersal agents, but there are some birds that are competent reservoir hosts for that bacteria. Songbirds, like our American robin, and our friend the wild turkey, which we seem to have in abundance here on Cape Cod. And then we've got a whole bunch of animals. They're what we call incompetent. So creatures like deer and raccoons and coyotes, they cannot infect the tick. Okay, their blood just destroys that bacteria, but they can provide a blood meal and help keep that tick population rolling along. All right, the risk of infection is year round, and we'll look at some data in a second to support that. But the greatest risk of something like Lyme disease isn't where you might think it is based on the data. It's not from these adult stage ticks that start coming out in September. They're with us now and they'll be with us into, mid-May. And in our surveillance research, we find that about 50% of them are packing that Lyme disease bug. The greatest risk is from these nymph stage ticks, and they're going to be coming out fairly soon. They'll be with us into August, and we see a much lower infection rate, about 20%. But that's a much smaller stage of the tick and more likely to elude a tick check. So we have a large stage of the tick and a small stage of the tick. As we were thinking about how do we convey this to people to help create a search image, how big is big, how little is little, all right? Well, it turns out that bagel toppings work out perfectly for this exercise. An adult stage tick is about the size of a sesame seed. And even with my feeble eyesight, I can see something that small. Those nymph stage ticks, they are the size of a poppy seed. So something that small with 8 legs and a real bad attitude that can plant you on your butt for a really, really long time. So we see this in the case data. We see cases of Lyme disease in, January, February, March, and October, November, December. Fairly low rate, but ticks are active when temperatures are above freezing. But when that nymph stage tick is around during the summer months, that stage of the tick is responsible for 85% of all tick-borne diseases. So we have to be vigilant year round, but we really have to be on our game during the summer months. And not everybody's affected equally. This is Lyme disease by age group. So on the far left, we see that kids under the age of 10 have about the highest incidence rate of Lyme disease in the state. So my messaging to the soccer moms and soccer dads is that this shows that everything we've been doing up to this point in time is not working. We got to rethink our game plan about how we're going to protect our children. And then see Lyme disease, lower incidence for people in their 20 somethings, 30 somethings. People are starting careers, they're starting families. There's less outdoor activity time. But as we get older, a couple things are happening. We have more leisure time, so ticks and gardening go hand in hand, perfect marriage. And also, as we get older, our immune system is playing the back nine, so to speak. Okay, so we're much more susceptible to these things. So we see another peak for people in their late 50s and their 60s and older. And we have two other emerging diseases. Up top, babesiosis, pretty serious disease. Um, it's kind of like getting malaria, and it can be directly fatal. And on the bottom chart, that's anaplasmosis. This is a parasite that impacts a type of your white blood cells. And again, it can be quite serious. These two diseases are very uncommon in younger people. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but not often. But 95% of the cases of those two diseases are for people in their late 50s and older. So it made me kind of look at what's the demographic profile of the Cape? If you look at the upper left, the median age in Massachusetts of people, 39. So 50% of the people in the state are older than 39, 50% are younger. Well, we have two towns that have a median age of 60. Most of the other towns have median ages in their 50s. I mean, Bourne is the youngest town on the Cape with a median age of 46. So we have a very highly susceptible population for these tick-borne diseases. So it's important for me to be in venues like this and library programs and senior centers because we have a group of people we have to reach every way possible. All right, winners. Um, People assume when we get our first fall frost, bug season's done. And with things like mosquitoes, that's certainly true. And people kind of carry that into, ticks. And I'll get calls from people in January and February, and I was getting a lot more calls this year with COVID. um, People were, to avoid cabin fever, were just getting outside for the sake of getting outside, and they didn't expect to run into ticks. And so I would get calls, Larry, the winter, it should have killed them. We had some really brutally cold stretches of weather. Well, are Cape Cod winters really that harsh? Um, from my standpoint, not. When I was at Ocean Spray, I spent 24 years traveling to Wisconsin, where I went by the name Sven. Okay. Wisconsin has real winters, 20 below zero for extended periods of time, not unusual. And in Wisconsin, deer ticks are quite healthy, and Wisconsin's quite endemic for Lyme disease. And the other thing is explains why Wisconsin has the highest per capita consumption of brandy in the country. Okay. Those people are absolute warriors and survive everything. I love them. The reason for this is that ticks make a chemical called glycerol. Well, what the heck is glycerol? These guys make antifreeze. All right. Isn't that clever? Um, so the way this works is that glycerol prevents ice crystal formation in cells. If you get an ice crystal that's in a cell, it's going to puncture the cell wall and everything's going to leak out. And that's not good for the organism. But they also discovered that the Lyme bacteria feeds on the glycerol as its principal energy source. So this is one perfectly engineered little package. Had to close the door again. My puppy keeps coming in and out of the room. He wants to participate in the meeting. All right. One of the questions I get from people, especially older people, where we didn't know about Lyme disease when we were growing up, and so the question posed to me is, Larry, how did we get into this pickle? What has changed? And so this is me thinking about the Lyme disease problem. Like, what's been going on? Well, a lot of people like to blame Bambi, okay, as the principal source of the problem, and that's the attitude of the people on the islands. It's kill Bambi as their solution. And deer can feed a lot of ticks. If you look at those ears of that deer, all those red blobs are engorged deer ticks, and each one of those ticks can lay up to 3,000 eggs. But deer are not really the source or the sole reason. They contribute. So I have a colleague in New York, Rick Ostfeld at the Carey Institute of Ecological Studies, and he shared with me a 14-year study. And what he did was he looked at the density of deer in the fall, which is that bottom horizontal axis. And then he looked at the population of nymph stage deer ticks on that vertical axis 2 years later, because there's a lag time in the life cycle. If the density of deer was a good predictor of tick populations 2 years from now, those data points would line up in a straight line from the lower left to the upper right, but they don't, okay? It looks like just a scatter. And if you look at that statistic in the upper right, R squared, 0.007, there is no correlation of the density of deer and the density of ticks. They're independent of each other. And we have similar data that we generated here on Cape Cod and the islands that basically states the same story. So something notable has been going on for the last 60 years. We've been cutting down trees, and we have cut down a lot of trees on Cape Cod because what we're doing is we're creating housing. And what we've done is we've created these beautiful suburban neighborhoods. And we didn't just cut down acres of forest. What we did was we fragmented the forest into patches, okay? And there's a ecological theory that when you reduce the size of a patch to a smaller and smaller size, at some point you lower biological diversity, and that is a fact. So through land use management practices, we've lowered biological diversity. And the consequences of this is that at some point when you have smaller patches, you start losing your top tier predators like fox. Fox are the most efficient predator of reservoir hosts like white-footed mice and chipmunks, but they're being displaced not only by the forest being cut down, but also coyotes moving into an area, because coyotes in an area will either drive the fox out or outright kill them. And coyotes are a very inefficient predator of our rodent hosts. And so what we've done is we've just opened the landscape to these reservoir hosts. We've just let them run wild. And so that is the reason that we have the infection rates in the tick populations as high as we have. And it has dramatically increased our exposure risk to these diseases. So we look at our program in a three-phase plan: protect yourself, protect your yard, and protect your pet. The way my job description should have been written is to take business away from doctors and hospitals by whatever means necessary. Okay. Um, and so I'm in the family protection racket, and I really enjoy that. So here's an average family on Cape Cod. Um, this is obviously Woods Hole, if you've ever been down there, and they certainly need protection from tick-borne diseases as well as from themselves. So the boilerplate recommendations, yeah, the long pants, yeah, tuck them into your socks. That'll keep the ticks on the exterior of your clothing easier to see. Um, in the time I've been working on Cape Cod, I've seen people make lots of bold fashion statements here, but you guys aren't making this one. If you wear light colors, that makes perfect sense. Makes it easier to see the ticks. I tell people when you come in from an outdoor activity, throw your clothes in the dryer, 20 minutes. That's all it takes. You see some recommendations about put your clothes in a hot wash cycle and then put them in the dryer forever. Well, research has shown that ticks survive a hot wash cycle quite nicely. The only thing that happens to them is they come out nice and shiny before you put them in the dryer and kill them. And wearing real shoes, okay? If you're going into tick habitat, yeah, flip-flops or sandals, that is just not the right thing to wear. Tick removal, all right? You see lots of, recommendations, particularly now online with things like Facebook. Bad information travels fast and far. And with respect to tick removal, yeah, it's not the Vaseline trick or the dish detergent or the flaming match. Throw all those to the side. Tick removal, pointy tweezers. Okay, that's all you need. And you just grab that tick by the head as close to your skin as you can get it, and gently pry up, straight up. You don't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger and rip that thing out at 100 miles an hour. Channel upward pressure and it will pop. Now, there's another myth online. My dog got bored with the meeting. Um, I need more dog jokes, I guess. Uh, the other myth online is that if you use big, fat, blunt tweezers, you're going to crush that tick and you're going to mainline these bad bacteria directly into you. Well, tick plumbing does not work like that. Okay, even if you use fat tweezers and crush that tick, um, worst case, you're just going to get a nasty infection at the point of attachment. Okay, so what do you do with a tick? I tell people, um, record the date. I think it's important to timeline these events because Lyme disease, the symptoms can show up in 3 days, might take a week, might take a couple weeks, might take a month. So if you know when you had a tick bite, now you're not feeling like yourself and you're going to start a conversation with your primary, you got a reference point to start to work off. I tell people, save the tick, all right? That is evidence. And like with our research ticks, you can send that tick to a laboratory at UMass Amherst and get it analyzed for what pathogens it may have been carrying. So tickreport.com, they've been closed for some time. The university had furloughed all the workers on campus. The lab reopened Monday, so they are back in business. And it's a great lab. Once they get that tick, you're going to get your report in 3 business days or less. And unlike the human blood test for Lyme disease, this test is 99.9% accurate. And they have a searchable database. All right. You can plug in your zip code and it's going to pull up all the tick reports for your neighborhood that you're interested in. And I pulled up a couple examples of tick reports that I thought were interesting. Here's one. This is a tick that came off a 3-year-old boy in Norwell. And this tick was attached to his head. The laboratory takes pictures and they give you an estimate of feeding state. Well, that tick was fully engorged, meaning that tick was on that kid's head for probably 5 days. Obviously, he didn't have a hairdo like I do, all right? But that's plenty of time for transmission. Now, for disease transmission, we have a 24-hour rule of thumb. If the tick is on you for less than 24 hours, the risk of transmission is low. It's not zero, but it's quite low. And after 24 and certainly after 48 hours, the risk of transmission ramps up considerably. So this report, the top one that's positive, that's Borrelia burgdorferi. That's the bug that causes Lyme disease. So without medical intervention, this little boy certainly would have came down with Lyme disease. But this tick was co-infected with Babesia, the agent that causes babesiosis. Now it's uncommon in younger people, but it can occur. So we have this co-infection. And this is something we're trying to drill into the heads of the medical community, that you can have ticks that are packing multiple pathogens and you can get more than one of these diseases at the same time. So for the patient, these are hard data that you can present and say, I was potentially exposed to this, and I was also potentially exposed to this. For a doctor that's on their game, and doctors were kind of lukewarm to this when we introduced it, because they know everything. All right, they're a tough group to educate at times, but there are doctors now coming on board and using this as a tool because it helps them give you an evaluation. What's your clinical presentation look like, and what should I be looking to do with you? Well, here's one that's a little more local. This is a woman in Eastham. Her tick hit the lottery. That tick was positive for everything we were interested in, and that tick was partially fed. So we don't know the patient outcomes for this, but this, from a clinical presentation standpoint, I mean, must have been really complex thing to figure out for this poor woman. All right, I talk about repellents as a first line defense, and repellents come in a couple different flavors. So we have repellents for treating our exposed skin, and they're effective. They just it means that tick won't bite you where the repellent is, but it just might keep marching along till it finds a place where there's no repellent. So we got two groups here. The group on top, so products like DEET or DEET alternatives like picaridin or oil of lemon eucalyptus, we have those. And the problematic group is the all naturals. And when a product says all natural, uh, soccer moms and soccer dads, it resonates with them because they're now convinced they're using something safe and effective on their children. And nothing could be further from the truth. The difference between these two groups is the group on top, those are EPA registered products. If the label says it repels ticks for 6 hours, there are data on file at EPA to support that claim. The all natural products, they are EPA registration exempt. They don't have to provide a single shred of data to demonstrate they work. They're, in my opinion, these are fraudulent products that should be removed from the market. There's another repellent that I came across 10 years ago when I was looking into this that is used to treat clothing. Um, the active ingredient's permethrin, so it's for treating pants and socks. This is a picture from my sock drawer, and today is National Superhero Day, and there are days I enjoy dressing up like a superhero and treating footwear, and it keeps its activity through 6 washings or 45 days because eventually it breaks down, so you don't have to treat continuously. And treating footwear, that is really important because those nymph stage ticks that cause what 85% of all of our problems, those creatures are down in the leaf litter. The first place they attach to are your shoes. And what I found in my research is that this just doesn't repel ticks. It actually kills ticks. And what I found in my research is that if a tick gets 60 seconds of exposure to a treated surface, it's guaranteed to die. And it might take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a little bit longer, but the outcome is guaranteed. This is the most effective tool in the box that we have. Okay. And I push this quite a bit. And there are several formulations, all right, and they're all the same. They're 1/2% permethrin. The biggest problem we had when I found out how effective this was is that really nobody was selling it. So I met with the owners or managers of all the major garden centers on the Cape and convinced them to stock product. And when I've now checked in with them that okay, we got product on shelf, how are sales? And it is flying off the shelf. A couple of stores like Agway and Scenic Roots have told me they're out of stock more than in stock now. So it's something that is great. You can also buy clothing that's pre-treated, okay? Uh, Insect Shield is the company that invented this technology, and you can buy clothing from Insect Shield, or they distribute it through other brands like Orvis or Ex Officio. Um, there's a new company on that upper right, No Fly Zone. That's a small company up in Maine that came online, oh, probably 3 years ago now. Similar technology, but same bottom line. Keeps its activity through 70 washings or 10 years, basically the life of the garment. And the other way you can skin this cat, you can send your clothing to Insect Shield, and it's a nominal fee. It's like $10 a garment. They will treat them and send them back to you within 2 weeks with that 70 washings claim. It's a good service. All right. the elephant in the room, particularly for parents, because they look at me like I'm absolutely insane. Okay. There's a certain amount of truth to that. But they posed the question, Larry, you're telling me to put my kids in clothing treated with a synthetic pesticide. And I nod my head. I don't budge on this point. I say, remember that slide? Kids under the age of 10 have the highest incidence rate in the state. We got to really think about this. It's not a toxicity barrier, it's a psychological barrier. And I spend as much time as necessary to walk people through it. A basic tenet of toxicology, it's not the molecule that makes a poison. It's the dose, okay? How much you were exposed to and what was the route of exposure. Was it oral? Was it dermal? Was it inhalation? All makes a big difference. So if you run the numbers, um, permethrins over 2,000 times more toxic to a tick than a person. People are big, ticks are really little. It does not take much to kill them. EPA, they have developed a position now that reasonable certainty that permethrin treated clothing poses no harm to infants, children, pregnant women, and then they extended that to nursing mothers. And their criteria certainly would be conservative. And the reason for this is the chemical properties of permethrin, really extremely low dermal absorption. There are other insecticides. The minute it touches your skin, it's in your bloodstream and it's on its way to your nervous tissue. But not so with this class of insecticides. And whatever small amounts absorbed is metabolized within a couple hours. They have verified that through looking at urine samples from volunteer subjects. Um, National Research Council, that is a heavyweight group. And this technology was originally developed for the military. And they raised the question about long-term exposure. They said, we're going to have people in this clothing for extended periods of time. What are the implications? And in their study, they looked at permethrin, people wearing permethrin treated everything head to toe, 18 hours a day, every single day for 10 years. And when they rolled up that aggregate exposure, they saw no reason to expect an adverse effect. And finally, the last thing I point out is that um, this is the active ingredient that you would slather on an infant at a much higher concentration to treat scabies mite. And it's the active ingredient now for treating head lice, which is making a comeback in our school system. So from my standpoint, what I see is what I think is a very low risk exposure cup. And I weigh that against the consequences of one of these tick-borne diseases. For me, that is absolutely easy math. People should not be hesitating to do this year round. All right, tick habitat. Um, I pulled this off the CDC website. It's accurate, but it's also somewhat misleading. It implies that you have to go to Nickerson State Park to get a tick bite. And it's certainly true. If you stay to the center of the trail, as they recommend, yeah, there's not no ticks there. But the minute you get into brushy vegetation, yeah, that's where the ticks are. And that's certainly true. Open grassy field, same situation. Tall grass, shade, plenty of tick habitat. But surveillance research in Connecticut showed that 2/3 of the people that submitted ticks to them for identification and testing reported that they got these tick bites from their own backyard. All right. And so you're not going to find deer ticks out in the middle of an open lawn, short grass, direct sunlight, higher temperatures, lower humidities. That deer ticks aren't going to survive that. We're finding Lone Star ticks can venture out into those more open areas. And as they become more abundant, I have to rethink about our yard management strategy. But you get to the edge of the yard that might be in partial shade, and it transitions to brush, shade trees, leaf litter. So much cooler, much higher humidity. That's where you're going to find the ticks. But if you think about this all the way through, those woody ornamental plantings at the edge of your house or along your sidewalk, yeah, that's tick habitat too. So as part of a 1-2 punch, I am an advocate of perimeter yard sprays. And so we have recommendations on our website for the products that work, the products that don't work. There are commercial services that do that. Buyer beware. There are companies that offer an all green, all natural solution. The research on those products show conclusively you might as well be spraying water, okay, for the amount of control you get. They are worthless. But there are products like permethrin that commercial applicators use that can be used quite safely. Once they hit leaf litter and soil, they're bound and they degrade by bacteria in about 4 weeks, and they're not going to leach to groundwater. Permethrin is very water insoluble. So the chemical properties of permethrin and things like bifenthrin are perfect for our particular application. Um, couple developments, recent developments. Um, Everybody knows the name Pfizer now, but they've partnered with another pharmaceutical, Valneva. They have a Lyme vaccine candidate in phase 2 clinical trials now. And so it's not just adults, but it's children as well. So this will be kind of interesting to see how this pans out. Um, there's, yeah, it's the only one that's in clinical trials. But this product was being called in the media a vaccine, but it's not a vaccine at all. It's monoclonal antibody technology. So the way it operates is it prevents the tick from able to transmit the pathogen into you. And this was developed by the School of Medicine at UMass Worcester, and this product is also in clinical trials. And with this product, you would get about 8 months of protection before you have to be retreated. So we got a couple things in the pipeline that could improve our situation. And finally, pet protection. This is my OG slide. Um, Certainly, if you have pets that go outside, a tick check is warranted. There's lots of over-the-counter products. In one of the events I do is the Agway Pawpalooza during the summer, and I talk to like hundreds of dog owners, and a lot of dog owners have swapped out uh, the monthly topicals like K9 Advantix 2 to this Seresto collar. And everybody except 2 people I've talked to are very happy. And you put this collar on your dog, you get 8 months of continuous flea and tick control. So the only people that had a problem with this is their pooches had a skin sensitivity reaction. But largely, and I tell people before you venture into something for your pet, talk to your veterinarian, because based on things like the age of the pet, whether it's pregnant or nursing, those all might suggest a specific course of action. And Insect Shield, they were not to be denied a marketing opportunity. They have permethrin treated neck gaiters and vests, and I have one of those vests, and I gave it to one of my colleagues who walks her dog in Nickerson State Park every night and picks up loads of ticks. And she told me when she put this vest on her pooch, tick free. She said it works like a charm. Um, because not everybody can attend workshops due to their schedules, I received a grant from Cape Cod Healthcare, and I scripted and produced 10 YouTube videos on every topic we have covered here. So we have a demonstration of how do you treat clothing with permethrin, how to do a perimeter yard spray yourself, how to submit a tick for testing at UMass. So it's about 90 minutes of material. So make some popcorn, pop a cold one or two, and you get 90 minutes of the Larry show. So we have simplified the game plan. Okay, you see a number of extension programs. It's a list of 8 to 10 things to do, and a lot of those things have no science behind them. And our program is evidence-based science. If I can't find data on a recommendation to support it, it's not here. So we've reduced this down to tick checks and use of permethrin treated clothing. You do that alone, you've reduced your chances of getting a tick bite by 90%. You couple that in with a perimeter yard spray, further reduce exposure risk, and finally pet protection. 1, 2, 3. So while these tick-borne diseases are serious and have impacted a lot of people, the silver lining is that we have tools to really reduce our exposure risk. And since this is a garden-oriented group, I came across this idea of container gardening. A lot of people love container gardening. This one is from Maine. So if you're going to have a junk car on your front lawn, yeah, you can make it look pretty. All right. And there's certainly a lot of cars on front lawns up there in Maine. I thought this was wonderful.
It is.
So with that, we can open this up for any questions that you may have.
Oh my gosh, Larry, this was amazing. I'm going to stop spotlighting you and allow people to open up, and you can unmute yourselves if you'd like. Again, it's not the 40 people that we expected, but this has been an amazing presentation. And you can't see the chat, but there's several people that have been chatting away as you were talking.
That's good. That's good. I love an engaged audience.
Correct. Yeah. So if you want to stop sharing your screen, we can then sort of see each other. And Jason has a question right off the bat. So go ahead, Jason.
How are you?
Thank you for joining.
Sorry if I'm driving right now, so I'm trying to talk and drive. But my question is in regards to I've Lyme disease and anaplasmosis.
Yep.
And my pediatrician told me not to get vaccinated for COVID because it could have an adverse reaction or make the diseases flare back up. And I'm just curious if that is at all true. Like if there's anything proven that interacts funny with the COVID vaccine.
I have no way of knowing that.
Okay.
It's the county doesn't want Larry Dapsis practicing medicine without a license. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor, never even played one on TV, although I think I could. So that would be a good question for, if you want to do a deeper dive. I think nobody knows the real answer since this is such a recent phenomenon.
Yeah, it's hard to know, Jason, what to do. I mean, I'm positive for Lyme myself, so I got the vaccine.
You did.
I did.
And you didn't have any issues?
I did get the fever and chills, but I will say, as long as you take your Tylenol for a 48-hour or 24-hour period, you'll be fine. But I did.
Like, I want to be vaccinated. I have a young son at home, so I don't ever want to risk anything with him. But I just, it's so new, you don't know. But
yeah, no,
okay.
I'm positive. For that, and I did. So take the Tylenol, and you'll be fine. That was my
okay. Okay, I appreciate that.
So I know it's hard to know what to do. It was interesting, Larry, you said, because there's some gardeners here, as you mentioned, it's true. And the Promethean. So you're recommending that we spray that, because I'm trying to get to that all natural, gardening method. And
yep.
get rid of
It
the chemicals?
it would be nice if those products worked, but they don't.
Yeah.
What
Okay.
is the ingredient that is used for the lawn spray, the perimeter spray? Is it promethean or another product?
Commercial applicators would use a product called Telstar.
Oh,
It contains bifenthrin, which is a cousin of permethrin, so same mode of action. But that's what commercial applicators would use.
so I saw in the chat someone had a question about what about the beneficial insects? Would it harm those, the ones that are good for gardens and lawns?
Sure. I mean, I run into that question continuously. It particularly, I mean, I spent last night on Facebook Cape Cod gardening page. Yard sprays came up, and I weighed in, and it was a 60 comment thread, including, what about the bees? What about the butterflies? What about my position is that you're this is not Rachel Carson Silent Spring. We are not eradicating the environment. This, if you think about this, a perimeter spray is really a spot treatment. It's a very small area compared to, the rest of the habitat that's
Right,
out there.
okay. And
And,
you don't want to
but
make those bug ticks feel invited. So it's really like it is a barrier.
yeah,
And
and there are things in leaf litter like springtails, and they're quite beneficial, quite numerous. You might have 20,000 of them in a square foot of leaf litter and soil, and they break down decaying organic matter, and they return nutrients into the soil. So you have a short-term knockdown of those creatures, but they repopulate areas very quickly. So this is not a scorched earth kind of thing, but it's hard to get people to accept that, because they equate pesticides with the catastrophic situation with bees, and I go through that. I do a pollination workshop, and I
I was
address.
going to say,
Yes,
right.
That's next.
we can do that. We can do that. Actually, I'm working on a new one, forensic entomology, using bugs to solve crimes, and I'm almost done with
Whoa.
that. Oh, it's gonna be, it'll it, it'll be riveting, guaranteed.
Does
But we
the yard spray do anything to help you if you have lots of birds that are coming into your yard and squirrels and all?
It's not going to impact them at all.
But I mean, is it gonna help us if we did a yard spray, if we had birds constantly in our yard anyway?
Birds will eat some ticks, the adult stage ticks that are up on vegetation. So people tell me they've got chickens and shouldn't have to spray, but birds, and there's research by Rick Osfeld in New York. He said birds can find the adult stage ticks, but they cannot find those nymph stage ticks to save their lives.
Do they carry them?
Oh yeah, they do.
So the yard spray wouldn't help us, would it, if we had constantly had birds around?
Well, you're going to get reintroduction of ticks. So the timing that I recommend is a spray in mid to late May, mid to late June, and that basically covers that window of nymph stage tick activity. And then I recommend a third spray in mid-October when the next generation of adult ticks come out. But animals are moving these things around constantly. So if you do a yard spray, yeah, they're going to repopulate, because of animal activity. But at least you can keep them at bay during the high risk windows.
Hmm.
So Larry, Porter, I don't know if you want to ask the question yourself. I don't know if it's your first name or your last name, but that's what's coming up on your iPad. Can you talk about tick sticks? Do you know anything about them, and do they work?
Tick tubes.
Okay, tick tubes.
Yeah.
I've heard of them.
They're cardboard tubes that contain cotton balls that are treated with permethrin. And
Um,
the idea is that mice will steal the cotton balls, take them down to the burrow, they self-treat, and yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Um, there were two really good studies done on this, one in Connecticut and the other in New York. And they both demonstrated that tick tubes had absolutely zero impact on tick populations.
Mm.
And I spoke with the researchers, and they had really identical reasons. They said mice aren't compelled to steal cotton balls just because they're there, okay? And not all tick-carrying animals steal cotton balls. So chipmunks don't, squirrels don't, raccoons don't, birds don't. So unless your yard was inhabited by white-footed mice that respect your property boundaries, that have an obsession for cotton balls, there is no reason to expect this product to work.
Oh,
The manufacturer has taken me off their holiday greeting card list, which makes me quite sad. I'm in therapy.
but it
So
is
if you spray your shoes,
treated. Yeah.
does that cut down on like if before you go outside or something, if you spray your shoes, will that help?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think treating footwear is mission critical
Okay. Hmm.
because that's the first place those nymph stage ticks attach.
Mhm.
Interesting.
So you say the garden centers have these types of things that we can get
Yes.
to spray? Okay, that'd be good. I appreciate
Or
you.
Dick's Sporting Goods, you go to their,
Okay.
there's the sporting section of like Dick's. But certainly all the garden centers now carry product.
I know that they have these solutions for dogs' paws. And as if any of you have dogs or cats, right? They, they're frequently inside, excuse me, the folds of their
Right.
paws. So there are solutions to, stick their paws in these buckets, if you will, to decontaminate them. But do those buckets contain promethium as
I don't
well?
know.
Or is it just like,
I've never seen that product on shelf, so
okay,
I don't know what they're using for an active ingredient. If it was permethrin, it would work like a charm.
right.
Hmm.
But I'm thinking we should add permethrin to that. It's just like a Clorox type
I
solution.
mean, if you
Disinfect.
have a dog and you put a Seresto collar on it, that active ingredient actually goes into the um, cutaneous fat layer just beneath the skin, and it gets redistributed through the entire animal. So if you have a collar on the neck and a tick bites its toe, it's going to die.
That collar made our sick dogs very sick.
Yep. Okay. I mean, there are reactions to products like this. So, I mean, alternatively, you can get an oral drug from your vet called NexGard that works very good.
Yeah, I mean, I had somebody else say that the Seresto collar was good for them. So I guess
Our dog uses it.
yeah.
When-
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of dog owners that love the product.
If we find a tick on her, it's dead.
Yeah.
Which is very helpful.
So
That's
Larry, I have a
my
question for you.
friend Martha would say that's a good thing.
Right. Go ahead, Tammy.
So Larry, I understand what you're saying about the yard sprays, but what if I'm in an area that abuts to a protected area and there are restrictions on what we can put on the property? What can we do? Because we're definitely in a high tick area.
Yeah, you can use that product on your property. The abutting property is going to be safe because once that material dries, like on leaf litter and soil, it's not going to wash off site.
Okay.
So it's not going to be washed into that protected area.
So since the water doesn't come up on our property, then it won't take.
Yeah, once that spray is dry, it's going nowhere.
Okay, because I didn't want them coming after me. I don't want the ticks, but I don't want anybody coming after me for treating the lawn,
Neighbors after you.
Is
And-
it in a conservation trust?
I don't know what it's called actually without looking it up,
Okay. As far as I'm concerned, you're safe. The product's being used according to the label. And as long as, you're not spraying it when there's 60-mile-an-hour winds, you're good.
Okay. And then I had another question. I don't expect you to be a doctor,
One,
but
one to a customer.
no,
Go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead.
just curious to know, and I'm not asking anyone to be a doctor, but are there any good infectious disease doctors on Cape who, understand tick-borne illnesses?
Dicey question. Dicey question.
Well, the reason I ask is I
Yeah.
had a horrible bout with Lyme in another state. And if I end up getting it again while I'm here, that doctor's too far away.
Yeah.
And I know that not everybody is good dealing with it. I mean, they may be a good doctor, but they don't know this.
Well, that's why one of the activities we engage in, we host physicians forums. So we invite all the Cape doctors to a meeting. We're scheduled to have one virtually May 12th. And we feel it's important to raise their level of competence in tick-borne diseases. And so we do this every year, because I've heard the patient horror stories.
Oh,
And,
yeah, it's.
there was one doctor, renowned for his ability, Dr. Sam Donta, who you may have heard of, but he is retired and closed his practice.
Okay. Oh, and I wanted to add one more thing, and then I'll be finished. I just wanted to say, for anyone who hasn't had like Lyme, for instance, there are, my thing was like a 1.5-year ordeal. But anyway, there are a lot of things that can change from day to day. And I took photos of rashes because they would come and go. And I had a very good infectious disease doctor, and she was very excited for the photos because that helped her know what was going on. So
Yeah.
I know
Well,
sometimes,
Lyme
patients
is
don't know.
Lyme is the most misdiagnosed infectious disease on the books, because to a doctor, somebody might look at you and think rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis or chronic fatigue syndrome, or it's in your head, you're crazy. I mean, people hear all of those things.
Well, there are a lot of symptoms, and I had several specialists. I had different types of specialists I had to see, and one of them at one point said, I think you almost had every symptom. So it can be pretty serious, and some people don't understand my fear of ticks after that, but I didn't go into the woods for a while after that. So
Yeah. Well, hopefully you learned a few things tonight that'll help you.
yes, well, the one thing I didn't know about was the egg cluster with some of those ticks. That's creepy, but
Sometimes when I have an audience and get to those things, I look at faces and they look like they're at a Stephen King film festival.
That's about
They're,
it.
they're horrified.
Very
That's
true.
about it.
Very true. I agree with you, Tammy. I too would like to see more physicians that are Lyme disease specialists. I think it's critical in this region. Yeah.
We have very good friends. It took him 2 years to get a diagnosis of Lyme disease, and that was 10 years ago, and he still has major problems.
Yeah. I've met people that have been sick for 10, 20 plus years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel for him because I thought I would never be better, and I was diagnosed within 10 days. So I can't imagine what people do. Yeah, I mean, that haven't even been treated. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's a sinister bacteria. If you look at the biology of it, it changes forms. If you have an antibiotic that prevents cell wall formation, it can go into a stage where it doesn't have a cell wall. So it's like you're missing the target. So that's why I'm hyped up on prevention. Don't get the tick bite in the first place, because you get a tick bite, you go into a doctor's office, that outcome is not certain, and that should be scary.
No, and I think my ordeal cost over $22,000 all in with everything.
Yeah.
So it's expensive too.
Yeah. I mean, the average cost of treating a single case of Lyme disease has been calculated to be $8,600. But for some people, it's like $20 of antibiotics, and for others, it's like $10,000 or $20,000 of treatment or more.
Yeah.
Well, I do know that getting one of those massive blood panels taken, I don't even know what they're called, but where they'll test just for everything, and your standard doctor would never write a script for that. So you kind of have to go to these special nutritional.
Oh, it's called a tithe. Tithe?
Sorry? Oh, yeah, that can
It's
cost
type.
many, many thousands of dollars
Mhm.
to get
Yeah,
that.
I remember one of the labs that the doctor ordered, just one of the tests for one of the tick-borne things was almost $1,500 for just the one test. So,
Oh my God.
yeah, I'm all about prevention.
Yeah.
There was only one good thing about Lyme for me was, and I know you say there's nothing good, but that my child didn't get it and I did. That was the only one good thing.
Well, there you go. Well, we're coming up on the 90-minute mark, and I want to give everybody an opportunity. Are there any other questions that anybody has? Well, we have Larry. We are hoping to get you back for another conversation because this was hugely enlightening. And for someone that has had Lyme disease and continues to basically battle it, but it was very informative. And I thank you for everything that you've shared. Does anybody have any other questions for Larry while we have him? And
I
No,
guess I do. I want to ask about the blood test again, because we have both had ticks on us, and we have been treated with the antibiotic that they give initially. And then our doctor does the blood test to see if we have Lyme, but it's a typical blood test that the insurance company covers, but it's always negative. But I've heard that it really isn't very helpful because it's not a good enough test to tell you whether you have Lyme.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
It's an unreliable test. You can get false negatives, you can get false positives. So just because a Lyme test says you don't got it, doesn't mean you don't got it.
And that's where some of the photos come in handy too, because I was sent to a dermatologist to confirm before the testing would come back. So
No, please let them out. Just make sure that the gate is closed.
say that again, Porter.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I was muted.
Oh, no, you're not. So Porter suggested getting the titer test.
Called, yeah.
It's in your chat, so you can, it's a different spelling, so TITRE. And that would help.
Does insurance company usually cover that or no?
I don't know, you'll have to check with your own insurance company.
No, okay.
Oh, she said no. So, Jason, do you have a question? I see your hand is up.
Oh, that's been up since the beginning when I first raised it, but I do have a quick question. Which tick, or all of them, which one carries anaplasmosis?
Deer ticks.
Deer ticks do. Okay.
And
No.
we find anaplasma in about 12% of the tick population.
Okay. No, that one, like I said, I had Lyme and anaplasmosis. I was at Mass General for almost a month because they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And then a infectious disease doctor from California finally figured it out, and it was a scary one.
Yeah, it resembles Lyme in some of its symptoms, but it does throw doctors for a loop.
Yeah, it affected my platelets to a point where they were waiting for me to start bleeding out because my platelets were at 28.
Mm-hmm.
So, but All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck, Jason.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So I hate to, I mean, Larry, again, this has been really enlightening, and I thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Larry.
Um,
Thank you, Larry.
if
Thank you for
anybody
coming,
has,
people.
yeah, if anyone has follow-up questions, send them to Highfield. Larry actually was copied on the link email, but let us know if you have any follow-up questions, and watch our website, because we're hoping to have Larry back for another topic. So this was hugely enlightening, and I again thank you everybody for joining, and I appreciate it. Larry, will be in touch. Thank
Stay
you so
safe
much.
out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome. Thank you for attending.
Yeah. Take care. And when will that vaccine be done? Be ready, you think?
Well,
Any
phase
idea?
2 clinical trials, so I don't know anything beyond that. It depends how that pans out, and then it's an FDA's court.
Years.
10 years. Yeah.
Years.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.
All righty, y'all. Good night.